Hi. So there are several scenes in the 2024 movie The Substance where the main character criticizes their other half. Now, when I say their other half, I'm not talking about their partner, a husband, or a wife. No, I'm talking about the other version of themselves. Because in this movie, in this world, there's a drug that allows people to create and maintain younger, stronger version of themselves that they can then temporarily transfer their consciousness into. The story goes like this. Aging star Elisabeth Sparkle is introduced to the substance after being pushed out of the entertainment industry. At first, she's hesitant to try it. However, the lure of a younger body and the ability to continue her career eventually prove too strong and she decides to take it, creating a new body and a new persona as Sue. I'll skip the details on exactly how the new body is made so that it can be a gross little surprise in case you haven't seen the movie yet and you want to check it out, which I definitely recommend that you do. A word of warning though, this movie is for mature audiences because there are a lot of bodies in it. Everything from hot, naked bodies to terribly misshapen and deformed bodies. The body horror is strong with this one. So if it isn't something you think you can handle, you might want to skip it. And it kind of pains me to say this because I really enjoy the way the story unfolds. Because the substance isn't some wonder drug. It's not a fountain of youth. No, it's part of a slightly gruesome process, a series of steps that must be followed in order for it to work properly. A key point in all of this is that the person has to be willing to return to their body every 7 days without fail, or there'll be consequences. And that, right there, is a problem. Had Elizabeth been able to discard her old body like trash, I have a feeling that she'd be fine, and that this would be a very different story. But she can't. Even if she could ignore how impractical living her life while alternating between two different bodies is, there's a mental side to this. Would someone who's willing to take experimental drugs to be young and beautiful again be willing to go back to their old body when the time comes? Spoiler alert, the answer is no. She soon stays in the younger body of Sue longer than she's supposed to. And when she returns to her original body, it's to find that one of her fingers has aged rapidly. A thick, crusty yellow nail and discolored skin of someone twice her age has appeared. Worried, she calls her supplier and says that there's been a slight misuse of the substance. I love the way she says that. There's been a slight misuse. Excuse me, but who misused it? It's a great example of one of the issues here because as she tries to explain the situation, she sidesteps any responsibility for her actions. She complains that Sue accidentally took more time, but as her supplier points out, there is no she in you. You are one. The story always gives me the impression that it's her consciousness, her soul, if you will, that moves back and forth between both bodies. So, whenever the body's not in use, it just lies there like an empty husk. This means that it's her own lack of self-control that's causing her problems. She's fighting against herself. At this point, I should probably take a step back to discuss conflict, since it's what I actually want to discuss today. Conflict, specifically the type of conflict known as man versus self or character versus self. First up, what is conflict? Conflict is the tension created by a situation or between characters. It's all about opposition and it can be internal, basically within the character themselves amongst their own values and desires, or external, coming from outside of the characters. Conflict is an important part of storytelling. Typically, if you wanted to create a basic plot, what you do is come up with a character. This character doesn't even need to be human, just capable of having a goal. Once you've given that character a goal, place an obstacle between them and their goal. The issues caused by the character running and bumping up against that obstacle is what creates conflict. And that's it. You have a story. It's a simple, really simple formula, but it's not an easy one. The quality of the character, the difficulty of the goal, as well as other aspects of the story all matter too. But conflict definitely plays a big role. I tend to think of conflict the same way I think of spices. Sure, you can cook a meal without any seasoning, but it's likely to be a bit bland, right? You can also tell a story without any conflict, but it's likely to be boring. If characters have goals that are too easy to achieve, they'll be called overpowered. But too much conflict for the sake of it, like drama for the sake of drama, it'll come across as being convoluted and unrealistic. Both extremes tend to turn off audiences. Now, if you wanted to know what type of conflict a story has, the best way to do that is to look at the obstacle that the main character or characters are facing. Are they battling werewolves, vampires, and other things that go bump in the night? Then it's man versus supernatural. Or are they trying to survive while Mother Nature keeps smacking them around? Well, that's man versus nature. Think of every disaster or survivor movie you've ever seen. If it's people facing off against each other, be it a cop chasing a criminal or romantic leads bickering their way down the aisle, then it's man versus man. Now, most stories have multiple sources of conflict. Often one problem leads to another. For example, the main conflict in The Terminator is clearly man versus technology, since it's all about an AI that gains sentience and then destroys most of mankind. However, when the machines send one of their own back in time to kill John Connor, an element of fate is added to the mix. John Connor is destined to become the leader of the human resistance after the AI apocalypse. The fact that there are now characters trying to change fate means that it's now a tale of man versus fate as well. There are people who know about the future and who are trying to stop it. And because the normal people around them don't believe them when they start talking about the end of the world, then there's conflict there too, man versus man, as those normies often interfere with the main character's plans. So that's 3 sources of conflict right there in one movie, all related to each other. Back to the substance. Let's break it down. What does Elisabeth want? She wants fame. She's had it before and she wants to be back in the spotlight again. What's standing in her way? You might be tempted to say that it's her age, but I think it's more about the way that society views her age. She lives in a society and works in an industry that values youth and beauty above everything else. Man versus society. Elisabeth versus her culture's beauty standards. These standards are the reason why her boss fired her, and why some people treat her differently when she's Sue instead of Elisabeth. It creates the man versus man or character versus character that exists, the conflicts that exist between her and her boss. But worst of all, Elisabeth has chosen to accept these standards as much as he does. Because she doesn't really challenge society's ideals, she leans into it sometimes, actually, and she doesn't challenge the people in her life that much. The most interesting conflict in the story becomes her internal conflict. One of the best scenes in the movie happens after Elisabeth has made plans to go out to dinner with an old friend. She gets dressed, does her makeup, and then right as she's about to leave, she notices Sue's body. She goes back to the mirror and adjusts her makeup. It's not enough, so she fixes it again and again, but nothing is ever good enough. She never goes on that date. It's such a devastating scene. There's no speaking, no over-explaining, and yet it is so clear what's going on and just how insecure she feels. She can't even make herself leave the house to go out with someone who she knows likes her as is, as Elisabeth. The world demands youth, beauty, and perfection. The substance promises to help Elisabeth achieve all of that. So, of course, she takes it. However, it's not a complete fix. She still has to spend half of her time as herself in the old body she now hates. So, it's not surprising when she starts spending more time as Sue. Then, when things go wrong, she starts to blame Sue. Elisabeth turns all of her frustration and anger at her situation inwards. She complains about Sue, and Sue complains about her. But since they're the same person, it's all her. Her internal conflict made external come to life and haunting her. Her versus herself. It's her own lack of self-control, both in terms of her inability to take the drug the way she's been instructed, and in her unwillingness to stop taking it altogether once she realizes exactly what it's doing to her. Most stories have some type of internal conflict, as the man versus self problem is pretty relatable. Knowing you should do something but having other desires pull you away from it, or having characters act against their own morals and beliefs, it can be pretty compelling stuff. With the substance, it's pretty interesting the way it unfolds. Very graphic, horrific body horror experiment to look at a person's downward spiral. Have you seen The Substance? If so, what did you think? Did you view Elisabeth and Sue as one person or as two separate entities? I'll admit that there were a few moments in the movie that made me wonder, but I still came to the conclusion that they're just one person. I believe it's a tale of a woman battling against herself. It was a wild ride, and overall I enjoyed it, mainly because of the central conflict and the themes that it tried to explore. The only complaint I have is that some of the scenes dragged on way too long, especially near the end. It's not because I'm squeamish. I felt that they'd already made their point, and they could have wrapped up the story a lot sooner than they did. But with that in mind, it's time for me to say goodbye. Feel free to let me know what you think, and thanks for listening.